So in this segment, we're going to be talking about the UK economy made worse by its own goals like Brexit and the Truss mini-budget, the IFS and IFS economists have said. So Brexit, slashing investment, and Liz Truss's mini-budget are amongst the own goals that have left the UK in dire financial straits, according to a top economist. So just for context, the UK is the worst performer in the G7 for growth since Q4 2019. The Truss budget probably would not have factored into this graph because its impact would have been seen later on, I think, more towards Q4, which is now. I mean, that's a straight own goal there, an expensive one to boot. But it was another mistake we made, not some global factor nonsense. If we look here, the US doing really well, 4.2% growth. But the UK minus 0.4. When you look at Germany, who have been the most impacted from this list for the Russian war in Ukraine, you would think Germany should, in theory, be doing better or worse than us, given that they are more impacted by global factors. They're not. Italy as well. I think Italy used to import a lot of gas and oil from Russia. Again, you would think they would be more impacted, but they're not. France, I'm surprised France aren't doing better, given that they're a massive producer of energy. But maybe you'll see that more come into play over the winter, given that they produce so much energy. But yeah, it's just Britain is an outlier out of the G7 countries. And the Tories hate global comparisons when they're doing badly, but love them when they're doing well or pretend to do well. But this graph kind of tells it all. The UK is a victim of itself and no one else. The sick man of Europe. You'll never sing that in your country. Paul Johnson, the director of the IFS, has been speaking about what left the UK in a position where yesterday's autumn statement that will leave more than half of all households worse off was deemed necessary. He said, "Let's start with the slashing investment spending. That was something announced under the last Labour government and continued by George Osborne, but let's not pretend that the scale that was done under New Labour was anything near as similar as done by George Osborne and will be done now." It's kind of a false equivalency, I think, to kind of make this kind of statement. Cutting spending on education, particularly huge cuts to vocational and further education, but also to schools over that period. The issue is that the Tories already cut a lot from schools' budgets. Some schools are already in debt, which is crazy. So how much can they cut at this point? It's simply unsustainable to make any more cuts to public services. It doesn't make any sense. Johnson added that very clearly Brexit was an economic own goal. And there may have been other reasons for Brexit, but economically speaking, that has been very bad news indeed and continues to be very bad news, particularly the way that we have done it. It's the hard type of Brexit we've had, distancing ourselves from the single market, he said. And this is the key here. Politics aside, economically, it's major damage. Exports are down, productivity is down, currency is down from 2016. These are just a few of the things that Brexit has impacted on a huge level. And you can see him set it out here. A hard Brexit is the thing that's done us in. Mr Johnson, not Boris Johnson of course, also pointed to Ms Truss's mini-budget, which inflicted around £30 billion worth of damage as it sent the markets into freefall. But you've also seen a claim from a former senior Bank of England economist who said that if it wasn't for Brexit, we wouldn't need austerity 2.0. And that kind of raised the question of how much did we really lose from Brexit. It sounds like a lot of money, even with $30 billion that Truss lost. Obviously, the mini-budget obviously didn't help. This one was clearly on us as well. Truss was not elected by the public, but our dumb systems have allowed a clown like her to take charge. In around 6 weeks, she cost us $30 billion in the short term, which is madness. While most of the policies of the short-lived Truss administration have now been reversed, Mr Johnson said the political instability of recent months was also not good for the economy. This is another important point. UK bonds were seen as the gold standard, a stable yield and a stable price. Yields are up, but they're not the gold standard anymore. So some of the reasons why the buying of bonds, like leveraging them for further investment, won't happen as much anymore. That means it will be harder to sell the bonds unless we increase the yields, which means increasing the cost of borrowing, which again has further negative effects. There have been 3 prime ministers and 4 chancellors in a few months, and to be reversing policy here, there and everywhere, to be uncertain about trading relationships with the rest of Europe, to have corporation tax going up, down and round and round and round, that's bad for growth. Businesses want stability, and we simply do not have that in the UK. The Tory party is so warped. We went from Truss's mad spending policies to austerity 2.0, which is going to be worse than the Cameron version. And the other point is, Liz Truss really tried to buck orthodoxy. It kind of had the kind of New Labour / Cameron consensus on economics, which is, Cameron is more really small state. But there is some convergence between New Labour, I think, and the kind of Cameron ideology on tax and spend and things like that. Liz Truss was really going to shake it up with really aggressive tax cuts. and it just wasn't going to fly. The market didn't accept it, and that's one of the reasons why we're facing so many problems now, and there's so much uncertainty in the UK, because no one really knows what direction we're flying in at the moment. The Chancellor presented his highly anticipated autumn budget littered with stealth taxes and curbs on government spending amounting to 55 billion in an attempt to plug the black hole. He sought to blame the Russian invasion of Ukraine for the global energy crisis, a global inflation crisis, etc. But they blame Labour, but Labour blamed 12 weeks of Conservative chaos and 12 years of Conservative economic failure for the bleak outlook, and that's true. It's really down to them. You can't blame Ukraine when this graph says it all. Surely Germany, France, and Italy should be struggling way more than us, considering they're far more reliant on Russia. I think. Why has that not happened? Given the financial damage Brexit has done, combined with trust, the damage those two things have done is way above 55 billion. So if these things did not happen, we would not be in this mess. That's down to the Tories. That's something Labour need to point out more. 32 billion on test and trace. We sure could use that money now. The Independent Office for Budget Responsibility, the OBR, warned the disposable income of UK households will fall by 7.1% over the next 2 years, the biggest drop on record. And things like this mean a much deeper recession. Capitalism requires spending and debt for the machine to work. Borrowing has gone up, and people won't spend as much. That's one reason why the UK is in a much deeper hole than the rest of the world. The costs of things have gone up significantly just for essentials. And when people can't afford essentials, the economy starts grinding to a halt and people really start suffering. Johnson warned that this will hit everyone, adding that Middle England is set for quite a shock. That's going to impact a lot of Tory voters. The truth is, we just got a lot poorer. We are in for a long, hard, unpleasant journey, a journey that has been made more arduous than it might have been by a series of economic own goals. As a result of Hunt's announcement, the tax burden in the UK will now be at its highest since the Second World War. And there are stark warnings about increased bills and higher unemployment, etc. It's forecast that the UK will still be in a recession into the summer of 2024, whilst the Eurozone will be out in the summer of 2023. So to blame global pressure makes no sense when the Eurozone is way more exposed to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The media has to point this out. Speaking to Sky News earlier, the Chancellor said it was a difficult time for everyone, but tax hikes and spending cuts are needed to get the economy on an even keel. Over the next 2 years, it's going to be challenging, but I think people want a government that is taking difficult decisions, blah, 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 blah. And, in my opinion, I think the people don't want austerity and for you to waste all of their money on vanity projects and cash to your friends. Looking at you, PPE scandals. But the UK is in a position where it's not just down to global factors. We've done multiple own goals here. Brexit itself, the very hard Brexit that Boris Johnson inflicted on this country, and of course the Liz Truss mini budget. How are you going to blame anyone else apart from ourselves for that? And if you don't believe me, this is the key right here. The UK is struggling more than the other G7 members. That's important to look at. Why are we an outlier when we really, really shouldn't be? And I think only 3% of our gas and oil or energy came from Russia. Yes, the global cost of these things have gone up, but Germany have had to cut off significant supplies, and industry, I think, are still worried about being cut off and having blackouts, etc. But the difference is, they are far more exposed to the Russian war in Ukraine, as I've mentioned multiple times here. And so they can really rally people around cutting down energy use. But, in the UK, it's not going to work. Because once it's pointed out that we're not that reliant on Russia, and the fact that we could use things like windfall taxes to help people, it doesn't really give the government much leeway to really push people to cut back on things like energy use. But the further problem is it's not that either. It's the UK's down on productivity, down on exports, amongst other. I think our exports to the EU have gone down by like 16% or something like that, and that's a massive loss in trade and jobs, productivity, etc. We are struggling for people in this country. When you look at the unemployment rates in this country, there are approximately 1.22 million unemployed people in the UK. When you look at the vacancy rate, it's about the same, about 1.26, so slightly higher. So, for us to really boost the economy, you need people to come in to fill these jobs in order to help push the economy, but that's simply not happening. And until we acknowledge the fact that we need immigration, as well as we need a massive increase in skilling up British people, we're not going to get very far, and we will struggle. To kind of push the economy, and that's just tragic, isn't it? Until Britain really learns that its xenophobia and its hatred of foreign people needs to end. Until that happens, the UK is going to struggle very, very much. This delusion that we can start trading again with Commonwealth nations, like British people really don't understand geography. But having an empire so big, and they talk about how big the British Empire is, they don't understand that geography really is a massive trading barrier. But anyways, I'm going to leave it there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Support the channel on Patreon if you can, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.